Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to get into part 2 of our Dillon Precision RL1100 reloading series. And in this video we're going to cover two stations, station 2 and 3. Keep in mind station 1 in this press is basically just the case insertion that comes down from the case feeder. So in station 2 we're going to work on our sizing die. And in station 3 we're going to work on our Swage Hold down, ID mandrel. And then that's kind of where we're going to leave it today. But I want to talk a little bit about sizing. One of the biggest questions I get, and a very prevalent question even on social media, is why do my 9mm look Coke bottle shapes? They're supposed to be, a straight walled cartridge. Well, let's back up a little bit. When we're talking straight walled cartridge for pistol, yes, technically they reload like a straight wall cartridge, but they're actually a taper cartridge. And I want to show you guys the SAMI spec here, and this is out of the Lyman 50th edition, but all of your reloading manuals are going to show the same thing. If we look at the base of the cartridge here, it's showing a dimension of 0.391 inches and then tapering down to 0.380. And one thing I want to note here, and I'll probably jump this up on the video so you guys can see it if you can't see it here, is there's no dimensions along the case here. So that indicates that 0.391 is going to be our rough starting point on the base, tapering down to 380. So with that being said, I have two cases here that I have sized. One with the gold match TNT sizing die that we're going to be using in this series, and then one with a regular Dillon carbide sizing die. So if we just look at just some rough dimensions here, I'm going to look at the Mighty Armory size case first, and then our base dimension here, I'm going to get as close as I can, is roughly 389. And then at the end, and granted this has not been reloaded or put an ID mandrel through or anything, we are going down roughly about 375, 0.375. And then I'm going to check in the middle. So I should be, in theory, if we're looking at a tapered cartridge, like we did here in our SAMI spec and our Lyman 50th edition here, a dimension in the center should be smaller than 0.390 or larger than 0.374, 375, or whatever I looked at it there. And we got a center dimension of 383. And if I just keep going towards the case mouth, it gets smaller. If I go towards the base, it continues to get larger up to 389, I'm sorry. So now I'm going to take the sized from the Dillon carbide sizing die, and I'm going to go to the base, and I'm at 389, very similar to the Mighty Armory die. I'm going to look at the case mouth, and it's 375, which is pretty typical, very similar to the Mighty Armory. So if I go along the case from the base to the case mouth, it should get smaller as we go. And then from the case mouth towards the base, it should get larger. So if I'm starting here again at the case mouth, I'm at 375, 375, and then all of a sudden, here in the middle, I'm getting down to 373, 372, and then I'm starting to ramp up towards the base. So from the get-go, the Dillon sizing die is already putting that hourglass shape in there. So when we go ahead and make our dummy rounds here, we have the Mighty Armory sized and put together cartridge. Again, these are dummies, and then the one with the Dillon dies. So if we do the same exercise, if I measure the base, again, we're right at 389, and we're tapering down to about 378, and that's where I put my crimp. So that was a good transition. We're going to look at the Dillon dies here again. We'll start here at the case mouth, 378. So that's, you know, where I was applying my crimp, and we're moving down. It should work its way up to around 390, and right there smack in the middle, we're at 373. So we're getting that initial sized shape is staying because it's in the middle of the cartridge and it's below where the actual bullet is inside the case. And then when we get working our way back to the base, we're getting into that normal 388, 389 range. So I did that exercise to show you that the Coke bottle shape starts off with the sizing operation. Now there's things that you can do to make it appear much worse. One being having too much of a flare prior to your bullet insertion, or not having your crimp set up correctly where you can actually buckle the case. One thing I want to make everyone aware of, I don't have it sitting here, maybe it's back here. When we're using an ID mandrel, like we're going to use in station 3 here as far as our Swage hold down, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that real quick. All right, so if we look at our ID mandrel, this area here on the end is what's going to bottom out inside the case and hold down that section where the swage rod's going to come up. But this area here is where we're going to set our ID size and control our neck tension. And then when we do the powder insertion, in your RL1100 1050 changeover kits, you're going to see a powder funnel like this. Now, if you look at your 550s and 750s, you're going to see a powder funnel like this. And these are going to be the ones that are actually going to do the ID expansion instead of the pin, and then also put the flare. These are also the culprits of the Dillon hiccup. They tend to stick, and they tend to be slightly oversized, and they also contribute to that Coke bottle shape that we have been talking about. In your RL1100 and your 1050 changeover kits, you're going to get just a universal flare expansion. It's not going to have any, it's not going to put any pressure on the ID. It's not going to size the ID. All it's going to do is put the flare on. So those of you guys who think you can just buy a plate or a shell plate for your RL1100 and use your existing changeover kits for your 750, 550, or whatever as far as the flare expansion, I caution you when using this pin to do your Swage hold down, you're also sizing your ID like an M die, mandrel die, things like that. So that's what we're going to base our neck tension off of. When you hit the case with that M die and then hit it with another expansion, in my experience, I struggled a lot with keeping bullet tension by hitting the ID twice. So I would recommend completely getting the RL1100 changeover kit when you're doing this, so you have this style of powder funnel and flare expansion versus this one. So the first thing that we've got to do is we have our caliber conversion put in place. We have all of our number 3 brass buttons. These 4 hold down clamps here, these are just like a UHMW plastic. You don't have to go super tight. All we're doing is they're wedged so that as you tighten these down, they push against the thread here on the main shaft coming up from the bottom. This knurled ring, we're going to hand tighten that until we mitigate as much free play in the shell plate as we possibly can and allow for it to index smoothly. So that's pretty simple. But to get into setting the sizing die up, the first thing we need to do is prep the die for its first use. So let's do that now. All right. Well, the first step we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and take this die apart completely. We're going to pull the lock nut off because these are going to have some machining lube still on them and maybe some lube to protect from corrosion, things like that. But here's the end cap. You can see it's got an O-ring in it. and a button that's going to correspond with the spring. That's what's going to give the decapping pin that flicking action. So as you can see, the decapping pins are completely serviceable. You can buy extra of these. They're fairly inexpensive. And there's the machine shaft, very high quality. And then if you look inside the die, what we're going to do is just kind of spray this down with some brake clean. I'll do that off camera because I'm going to do it outside. And then once we get it all cleaned up, we'll get it put back together. Now we have everything cleaned up, we can go ahead and reinstall this all back together. Here's our ID pin for our decapping operation, our tension spring, and then we're going to put our center cap on, making sure that this machined area goes inside the spring. Push it in firmly, and then thread it together. Just like that, hand snug. There's an O-ring there, it keeps it from backing off. Put our lock nut on. And now we're ready to install it in the press. Now that we have our sizing die all cleaned up, ready to go for its first use, again, it's going in station 2. So step 1, we're going to go ahead and bring our tool head all the way down to the lowermost position, and we're going to thread our die in. And setup on this is actually kind of a breeze. We're just going to take it down all the way down till it makes contact with the shell plate, just like so. I'm going to back that lock nut up a little bit just to make sure. Yep, we're making contact. And what I always like to do is I like to throw a case in there. So I'm going to grab one here real quick. So we're going to open it back up. I'm going to take my button out, put a case in station 2, go ahead and run the sizing die all the way down, and then lock my ring down with my wrench. And we're going to have that as our starting point. All right, so now we're going to jump into station 3, but just a real quick note, these dies, you have plenty of room up here. They're sized perfect. The knurling's great. I mean, I really love these dies. So let's jump into station 3 and get it set up. So here in station 3, this is where we're going to use our Dillon hold down die. Again, this is going to hold down the case so that we can do the swaging operation. And I'll show you here real quick. You can see the swage pin coming up in station 3, and very similar to your Dillon Super Swage or any of the RCBS. It's just going to go up there and expand that ID of the primer pocket so that you can do away with those military crimps. This works really good on 223 when you're loading it, especially on the Dillon CP2000. But there's an adjustment here, and the ID pin basically just threads in like so. And I'm going to show you guys a little tool that I use to get this swage kind of a baseline set, and then some other tools that we use to check that to make sure that we're not going too big or too small. But as you can see, the pin's going to go inside the case, and then also in this section here, it's also going to do a neck expansion so that we can set our neck tension consistent regardless of the wall thickness of the various brass that we're using. Again, we're going to use mixed head stamps. So the main thing is we want to make sure we get our neck tension consistent. That's going to improve our accuracy, reduce our splits, and have a consistent cleaning, birding, finished cartridge once everything's complete. So let's go into getting this kind of roughed in, and then I'll show you some of the tools that we got to check everything. All right, so now what I'm going to use to kind of get our swage roughed in is a little tool here from Ammo Brass. This is what they call the Swage Setter. And as you can see, it's a machined 9mm case, and it has a cutout so you can see inside the case. And what we're going to do is watch our ID pin, make sure we bottom it out right there on the first flat. And if you look inside, we can see our flash hole and our swage. This one is a case that does not have a crimp. So what we're going to do is marry up our swage rod. I'm going to check it. It may not need adjusted, but if you need to adjust it, there's a lock nut, and you can run the swage up farther into the brass if you need to. But what we're going to do is just set it into station 3. Make sure our window is visible. And then we're just going to go ahead and run our tool head down, and then we're going to start threading down this ID mandrel until it bottoms out there on the brass. You can see I've already made some contact, and that's probably the expansion portion of the pin. So I'm going to have to back it up a little bit, tighten it down, and keep making those adjustments until I bottom out like so. And we're getting pretty close. And what I like to do is get it till I get just a little bit of tension on my handle, lock it down, and then we're going to call that good. So now we'll go ahead and lock down our lock ring. And then we're going to confirm our swage is correct with another tool here. All right, so here I have a piece of brass that has the military crimp in it. And what I have here is a go, no-go gauge, and this one is available from Ballistic Tools. And I will put links to both of these tools that I showed you, the Swage Setter and this, in the description so you guys can pick these up. But if you look at this gauge, one side has a flat area and the other side has kind of like a just a much smaller, I don't know what you'd call that, machine surface there. That would be the no-go and this would be the go. So for this to, as you can see, it's not inserting into the primer pocket. So now we're going to go ahead and confirm our swage is set up correctly, and I'm just going to loosely put this in there. We're going to run it through, make our swage, take the case out, and now it should be swaged. So this should go in, which you can see it does. You don't want to go too loose, because if you're too loose, then this end would go in and that would be your no-go. That means you've over swaged it, but we want that to fit in there just like so. So that is good. We know our swage is set up correctly, so now we can move forward. All right, so we have our Station 2, our sizing die set up. Again, this is the Mighty Armory TNT Gold Match Lubeless Sizing Die. And I know it says lubeless, but for me, regardless if it's a lubeless die like this or even a carbide sizing die, I always use case lube just because it seems like it's less effort on the press, less wear and tear on the press, less wear and tear on my shoulder, and it just makes everything run a heck of a lot smoother. Now with this die, I would not recommend an aerosol type case lube like that stuff over there. I would use a lanolin based case lube. Like if you go back several months and see the Squatch Lube recipe, that's what I like to use. Again, it's just a PEG 75 lanolin. The key is that it's PEG 75 lanolin, and that's available from Florida Sunshine Products, and at 99.9% alcohol, not denatured, not witch hazel, not rubbing alcohol, 99.9%, and that's typically known as heat. The red heat is what I use. Go back and check out that lube recipe video if you're curious on that. So I will use that even with this lubeless die as well. So we also got Station 3 set up. We got our swage confirmed, and again, just wanted to show you guys these tools here. This is the go, no-go gauge that I showed you from Ballistic Tools. They make this for large primer pockets as well. I'll leave a link again in the description. And then the Swage Setter just makes life easy. You can get those swages set up really quick. There's no wasting brass or anything like that. Just get them set up the first time, the right time, and you're ready to roll. So that's going to wrap this video up. I appreciate you guys watching. If you would, hit that like, subscribe, share these videos. Drop me a comment below if you have any questions, or hit me up on my email, squatchreloading@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram as well. I try to get back with everyone as soon as I possibly can. It's really crazy busy right now, but I try to make time to get back to all your questions, and I appreciate all you guys watching. But until next time, guys, God bless.